and that the very most she alleges in any of them is that the president said, "I don't know," or "let me think about it," when she raised the issue of the gifts. Indeed, in many of her versions, she said, among other things, there really was no response, that the president did not respond, that she didn't have a clear image in her mind what to do next. She also testified that Ms. Curry's name did not come up because the president really didn't say anything. And most importantly, in not a single one of her multiple versions of this event did she say that the president ever initiated any discussion about the gifts, nor did he ever suggest to her that she concealed them. Now, there being no evidence of obstruction in that conversation, the managers would have you believe that after Ms. Lewinsky left the White House that day, the president must have told Betty Curry to retrieve the gifts from Ms. Lewinsky. But there's absolutely no evidence that that discussion ever occurred. The only two parties who would have knowledge of it, the president and Ms. Curry, both denied it ever took place. Now, in the absence of any such evidence, the managers have relied on Ms. Lewinsky's testimony that Ms. Curry placed a call to her and told her, depending on Ms. Lewinsky's version, either that the president had said to Betty, Ms. Lewinsky had something for her, or merely that Ms. Curry, understood that Ms. Lewinsky had something for her. In this regard, it's important to remember that Ms. Lewinsky herself testified that she was the one who first raised with the president the notion that Ms. Curry could hold the gifts. And it's important to recognize that contrary to the manager's suggestion to you, that Ms. Lewinsky's memory of this event has always been consistent and unequivocal, I think was their word. She herself acknowledged at her last grand jury appearance that her memory of the crucial conversation is less than crystal clear. To wit, a juror, do you remember Betty Curry saying that the president had told her to call Ms. Lewinsky? Right now, I don't remember. And now we come to the first example I promised you of prosecutorial, what shall we call it, fudge. Starting from the premise that Betty Curry called Monica Lewinsky and told her that she understood she had something for her, and then went to pick up a sealed box containing some of the gifts she had received, that Ms. Lewinsky had received from the president. First, the independent counsel concluded, and then the majority report concluded, and now the managers have concluded that the president must have instructed Ms. Curry to go pick up these gifts, to call Ms. Lewinsky and make the arrangements. So that they determined that when Ms. Curry said it was Ms. Lewinsky who called her, Ms. Curry was mistaken, or, if you listen carefully, maybe worse. And when the president testified that he didn't tell Ms. Curry to call Ms. Lewinsky, he was, well, just worse. And this surmise is made absolutely certain in the view of the managers because a newly discovered, unknown even to the independent counsel, cell phone record shows that Ms. Curry called Ms. Lewinsky at 3:32 p.m. on December 28th. And that must be the call that Ms. Lewinsky remembered. Let's look now at how the majority counsel for the committee put it in his closing argument to the Judiciary Committee. And I put his words up on the chart, and you all should have it in front of you as well. There is key evidence, said majority counsel, that Ms. Curry's fuzzy recollection is wrong. Monica said that she thought Betty called her from cell phone. Well, look at this record. Show it to you in a moment. This is Betty's cell phone record. It corroborates Monica Lewinsky and proves conclusively that Ms. Curry called Monica from her cell phone several hours after she had left the White House. Why did Betty Curry pick up the gifts from Ms. Lewinsky? The facts strongly suggest the president directed her to do so. Well, there's a slight problem with the majority counsel's epiphany as it has been passed down to the managers and then to you. For you see, and here is the cell phone record, it reflects that at 3:32 p.m. on December 28th, from Arlington, Virginia to Washington, D.C., that's Ms. Lewinsky's number, there was a call of a minute, it says here. And then we have to ask, does this timing fit with the rest of the testimony? Well, the answer is no, it doesn't. Because on 3 separate occasions, Ms. Lewinsky testified that Ms. Curry came over to pick up the gifts at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, an hour and a half before the phone call. Now, it's not as though we've been hiding the ball on this, senators. We discussed this issue at length in our trial brief. And the managers do seem to have recognized at least some of the problem, because they have told you, albeit without the slightest evidentiary support, that maybe Ms. Lewinsky just miscalculated a little bit. Well, maybe she just miscalculated a little bit 3 times. Look at the record. FBI interview, July 27th. Lewinsky met Curry on 28th Street outside Lewinsky's apartment at about 2 p.m. and gave Curry the box of gifts. FBI interview, August 1st. Lewinsky gave the box to Betty Curry when Curry came by the Watergate about 2 p.m. Grand jury testimony 3 weeks later. I think it was around 2 p.m. or so, around 2 in the afternoon. Now, the managers speculate that if only the independent counsel had had this phone record when they were interviewing Ms. Lewinsky, they could have refreshed her recollection. Now, having been one, I can tell you that's prosecutor speak for, if we'd only known about that darn record, we could have gotten her to change her testimony. But the managers have one other problem that they didn't address. The phone record, if we can go back to that for a moment. The phone record shows a call lasting 1 minute. And all of us who have cell phones know that that really means it lasted well short of a minute, because the phone company rounds things up to the nearest minute, just to help us all with our bookkeeping. So now it would be necessary not only for Ms. Lewinsky's memory to be refreshed about the hour of the pickup, but to explain how the arrangements for it could have been made between Ms. Lewinsky and Ms. Curry in somewhere between 1 and 60 seconds. Now, putting these factual difficulties aside, this charge must fail for another reason. As you all know from the presentations earlier, the President gave Ms. Lewinsky several gifts on the very day that they met, December 28th. Now, faced with having to explain why on the day that the President and Monica Lewinsky were conspiring to conceal gifts from the Jones lawyers, the President gave her additional ones, the managers surmised that the real purpose was because it was part of a subtle effort to keep Ms. Lewinsky on the team. But in truth, the only reasonable explanation for these events is the one the President gave to the grand jury. He was simply not concerned about gifts. He gave a lot. He got a lot. And he saw no need to engage in any effort to conceal them. The President did not urge Ms. Lewinsky to conceal the gifts he'd given her. And of course, he did not lie to the grand jury about that subject. The next point I want to discuss with you is the statements that the President made to Betty Curry on the day after his Jones deposition, January 18th of last year. There's no dispute in the record, no conflict in testimony, that the president did meet with his secretary, Betty Curry, on the day after the Jones deposition, and they discussed Monica Lewinsky. The managers cast this conversation, this recitation, this series of statements and questions put by the president to Ms. Curry in the most sinister light possible, and alleged that the president intended to influence the testimony of a witness, quote, witness, unquote, by pressuring Ms. Curry to agree with an inaccurate version of the facts surrounding his relationship with Ms. Lewinsky. President Clinton has adamantly denied that he had any such intention, and that denial is fortified by the undisputed factual record establishing that Betty Curry neither was an actual or a contemplated witness in the Jones litigation, nor did she perceive that she was being pressured in any respect by the president to agree with what he was saying. First, Ms. Curry's status as a witness. And the only proceeding the president knew about at that moment, the Jones case, Ms. Curry was neither an actual nor a prospective witness. As to the only proceeding in which she ultimately became a witness, no one would suggest, managers, no one else would suggest, the president knew that the independent counsel was conducting an investigation into his activities. In the entire history of the Jones case, Ms. Curry's name had not appeared on any of the witness lists, nor was there any reason to suspect Ms. Curry would play any role in the Jones case. Discovery was down to its final days. Now, the managers speculate that the president's own references to Ms. Curry during his deposition meant she was sure to be called by the Jones lawyers. Yet in the days, weeks following the deposition, the Jones lawyers never listed her, never contacted her, never added her to any witness list. They never deposed her. They never noticed her deposition. Indeed, when the independent counsel interviewed the Jones lawyers, they apparently neglected to ask whether they'd ever intended to call Betty Curry as a witness. And one can be sure that if such intent existed, they would have asked. And it would have been included in the referral. Moreover, it's a sure bet that the Jones lawyers already knew about Betty Curry and her relationship with Monica Lewinsky. Why? Because we know from her own recorded telephone conversations that Ms. Tripp had been in contact with the Jones lawyers for months. And we know that she spent the evening before the president's deposition telling them everything she knew. It didn't take a few references to his secretary by the president to trigger a subpoena for Betty Curry if they'd ever wanted to do that, and they never did. Nor did the president ever pressure Ms. Curry to alter her recollection. Despite the prosecutor's best efforts to coax Ms. Curry into saying she was pressured to agree with the president, Ms. Curry adamantly denied it. Let me quote just briefly a few lines of her grand jury testimony. Question. Now back again to the four statements that you testified the president made to you that were presented as statements. Did you feel pressured when he told you those statements? Answer. None whatsoever. Question. What was your impression that he wanted you to say? Because he would end each of the statements with right, with a question. Answer. I do not remember what he wanted me to say right. He would say right, and I could have said wrong. Question. But he would end each of those questions with a right, and you could either say whether it was true or not true. Answer. Correct. Question. Did you feel any pressure to agree with your boss? Answer. None whatsoever. Now, to understand on a human level why the president reached out for Betty Curry on the day after his deposition, you need only to understand that he had just faced unexpected, detailed questions about his worst nightmare. As he candidly admitted to the grand jury, he had long feared that his relationship with Ms. Lewinsky would ultimately become public. And now, with questioning about her in the Jones case, publication of the first internet article,